What's up, hockey fans? This is Randip Janda from Hockey Night Canada, Punjabi. Welcome to Inside the Game, and we've got a special collaboration yet again. Last time we chatted, it was hockey meets F1. This week, it's going to be hockey meets WWE. It's a connection that is very special, and there's a lot of shared connections. This week, we are joined by a WWE superstar, fellow Canadian, Sami Zayn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's always great to talk hockey and wrestling. It's one of my fondest memories as a kid. And first of all, you've just come back from Saudi Arabia. A lot of international dates here in Vancouver. Survivor Series WarGames is coming up on November
Yeah.
30th. These international dates, like especially coming back to Canada, what does that mean to you?
Well, so I feel especially privileged because I'm from Montreal and I'm also an Arab and a Muslim. So we do these PLEs. We just had a huge PLE in Saudi Arabia, and I feel like kind of like a hometown guy there in a way. And then we come back to Canada, and even though we're in Vancouver, I still kind of feel like in a way it's like a hometown thing being a fellow Canadian. So it's great for me. And we have Toronto at the Sky, well, formerly the Sky Dome, now the Rogers Center, coming up in March. So WWE, I think, is making a bit of a concerted effort to become a bit more of an international brand when it comes to these PLEs, especially, big pay-per-views, as we used to call them, used to always just emanate from the States, but now you're seeing it more and more. Scotland, France, Saudi Arabia, a couple from Canada. And I think the fans, part of the appeal to that to me is that the fans are so excited. I mean, Vancouver hasn't had a PLE. I can't even remember when, if ever. Um, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I can't remember if you guys had a pay per view in like the 2000s. I really
I,
don't remember.
I believe there was In the House way back when,
Yeah, you're
as a
talking.
young kid, I remember that. Yeah,
Yeah, you're
way
talking
back.
late 90s here. Yeah, if at all. So I think it's a really big deal, and the fact that it's Survivor Series, a historically huge PLE, and it's War Games. This really huge match is such an attraction. I'm super excited because I know how excited the fans in Vancouver are going to be.
Well, you talked about going, being a Muslim in a Muslim country. It's kind of a home date for you,
Right.
unique experience. Well, let's talk about the Canadian aspect too. Is that home crowd, does that provide a different pop for you when you come to
For
Canada?
sure, for sure. That's why I feel like I'm like it's unfair because if we go to even French-speaking countries, like if we're in France or Belgium and I'm speaking French, I'm getting like hometown kind of love, When we go to the Middle East, I'm getting hometown love, and if we're in Montreal, forget it, that's a next level. But even if we're in Toronto or Kingston or Winnipeg or Saskatoon or anywhere in Canada, it's like a hometown thing. So I feel like I'm really lucky because internationally, I'm getting so many corners of the globe that treat me like I'm their guy. And that's the thing about Canada. Again, yeah, I'm from Montreal, but anywhere we go in Canada, they treat me like I'm their guy. And it's a really hard thing to explain to people that are not Canadian, like the other American wrestlers. Even if we wrestle in their hometown, if somebody is like the Miz is from Cleveland, as an example, like it's a little special, but it's not the same level of homecoming the way the Canadians and the Canadian fans roll out the red carpet for their people. And maybe it's because we're not as widely represented in sports or entertainment, but Canadians are just exceptional when it comes to rolling out the red carpet for their own.
You recently had a moment in Calgary as well where Bret Hart was out there. There
Yeah,
was a special pop that night, but also there was a moment we've all, been dealing and watching with the tragedy of Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau. That was a terrible moment in the world, and you had a special moment that night where you wore his jersey into the arena and you acknowledged and you paid tribute to the player. Why was that important to you, and what did that mean? A moment mean to you of acknowledging and paying tribute to those brothers?
well, I mean, I'm a big hockey fan. I'm not just saying that because I'm talking on a hockey show here, but it was just a devastating loss for the hockey world, and like a shocking one. Just once in a while you'll hear, not to diminish the value of anybody's life here by any means, but sometimes you'll hear of a hockey player who died, and in a different country or whatever. It's rare that a superstar in the prime of their career just dies so unexpectedly like that. It just it takes you aback. It's the same thing. I mean, again, not to harken on other tragedies here, but when Owen Hart died all those years ago in the middle of it's like, it's just so shocking. You think, okay, one day after it's all over, if you hear they pass away unexpectedly, that's bad enough. But to be taken in the midst of it all, I think it just shocked so many people. And it was just so jarring to the hockey community and to the city of Calgary because he was so beloved. And I really felt it that day when we were driving up to the arena and I saw the memorial outside of the Saddle Dome. And I'm just happy that I could. What a night for me. I mean, I'll never forget that night. Not only being able to share the ring with Bret Hart, a Canadian icon, my childhood hero, in his hometown in Calgary. That's just incredible enough. But then to be able to, in my own small way, pay homage to, to the Gaudreau legacy and to that city and for what it meant, to just acknowledge the loss. I think that meant a lot to me.
Well, you helped also a mourning city, in that moment as well. It was a special moment, even to watch on television as you were walking into the arena. So, that was a special moment, and thank you for doing that. That was a city that needed it at that point in time.
Well, and the big thing for me was to not make a spectacle out of it. Like I was wearing it, but we didn't draw attention to it, and it wasn't the hey, we're in Calgary. It wasn't any of that. It was just a silent kind of, as you said, acknowledgement of what the city was going through at that time.
Well, you mentioned Bret Hart and it being his hometown. Well, let's go back to 2023, the Elimination Chamber in your hometown of Montreal. First of all, to have that headliner in your backyard, like what's the mindset going into that? Just knowing that this is probably, correct me if I'm wrong, the greatest moment in your career in the sense that it's in your backyard and it's the main event, baby.
Yeah, and it was the main event. Oh, this is, I think, what made it ultimately even more special, right? Is that it wasn't because it's in Montreal, let's feature the hometown guy. It was a culmination of a year-long storyline that captured the entire wrestling world, like in a very, very unique way, in a way that we haven't seen a storyline really capture people in years. And I don't know if I'm, just blowing smoke here.
No, I agree.
It really was a special storyline, and it just so happened to culminate at the exact time where that PLE was in Montreal at the right time for that match. Like the stars just lined up, so that's what made it doubly special. I don't even really know what to say about that. It was just such a unique set of circumstances, and the vibe in that arena is. I'm trying to take myself and my own biases out of it. But I'd like to think that even if it wasn't me and it's not Montreal, if you're a fan watching that in like wherever, the UK or in Texas or in South America, or wherever you're watching it, you still felt how special that was because it was just so many things lining up, and the emotion in the arena that night was just the closest thing I could compare it to was Survivor Series 97 in that same arena with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, with that feeling of like, I mean, it was hostile for Roman, it genuinely was. And it really felt like a real fight was about to take place. It had that same kind of energy, like George St. Pierre happened to be there that night. I met him and he was a wonderful guy, but it really felt like a big George St. Pierre title fight. Like it's a real thing going down and this is our guy, really hard to articulate, but it was really special.
Oh, well, okay, you mentioned 97 and that moment, we're about the same age. I'm 38. I believe you're a couple of years older or about a year older than I am. How
Right.
big of a moment in your wrestling fandom was 97? As we love to call it, the Montreal screw job.
Yeah.
How big of a moment was that in your wrestling fandom?
Uh, you know, it's hard to say with any certainty cause and effect in this life, like I'm not saying that directly led me to the career and the life that I then went on to have, but yeah, I would say it's pivotal in that here's the big thing for me, the biggest takeaway, I think, as if nothing else, just as a performer, is the feeling that I had as a 13-year-old in the crowd that night, sitting in section 424, no big screens, not even really understanding what happened. But the confusion, the disappointment, the betrayal, the everything that I felt, and that physically manifesting in this feeling of a pit in my feeling of something gnawing in my stomach. To be able to physically feel that from something as, simultaneously silly and profound as pro wrestling, I think that got locked in me on some level. And as a creator, later years, myself, I think it was about replicating those types of emotions on a physical level where fans, whatever story I'm telling, whatever match I'm having, to be able to, when you do it really well, get them to feel those types of feelings that they can physically feel with their whole body. You know what I mean? And that's a big source of pride for me, is that Bloodline storyline and the feeling in Montreal. Like, I mean, people felt that. So I mean, what more could you ask for as a wrestler or as a performer or as an artist of any kind, other than for your art and the fruits of your physical labor, in the case of wrestling especially, to be able to take people on that kind of ride,
Well,
that
well,
kind
I
of emotional ride that they could physically feel with their whole body.
Absolutely. And, going
Yeah.
back, whether it's in the last 5 years, there's those moments that you remember 20 years, 30 years down the line, or it's, for a certain generation of wrestling fan like yourself, when you're a kid, you remember when Hulk Hogan switched to the NWO. That's going to be,
Right.
you remember the Montreal, the screw job. You remember certain moments, even the last 20 years. I think the Bell Center is a great launch point, though, for us to talk about hockey. That's
Yeah.
where special moments in wrestling have happened, but also we know
Yeah.
with hockey as well. How did you get into hockey? When did that start for you? Did you play?
So I feel like wrestling and hockey were two things that just were always there. I had older brothers, maybe that was it too. And my dad liked wrestling. So as early as I have conscious memories, age 4, age 5, they were always there, wrestling and hockey. And you know, I think at that age, I know a lot of people talk about things like wanting to be a wrestler when you grow up, but I had no concept that this was like a profession, that money was involved. You don't understand that concept really at 5 or 6, that this could be a job or a career, just something you want to do, like you like watching it. And if you're kind of like wired a certain way, like perhaps I am, well, I enjoy watching it. I'd like to be in it. I'd like to do it myself. So I wanted to play hockey growing up, and I wanted to wrestle. And I only found out later, I pushed my parents to put me in hockey, and they never did. But I only realized much later, well, hockey's a very expensive sport, and we had no money.
Yep.
And like the level of commitment it takes from parents. And I was in the middle of 5 boys, and life was hectic. I'm sure for my parents, and they're just trying to make ends meet with 5 boys. So, you're not taking kids to 5 a.m. practice and driving an hour and a half and doing it's really a demanding job. And now in my older age, I realize anyone that you see in the NHL or like a superstar player or goes on to the Olympics, I'm talking like a major NHL star. I'm like, that guy had good parents.
Yeah.
That guy's parents were extremely, extremely involved. Like that guy did not get there on his own. I don't care who you are, whether you're Wayne Gretzky or Sidney Crosby or any of the greats. Their parents are just as much as a part of that journey as they are. It's really, I mean, I'm a big believer in like we don't really do anything on our own. We like to think we are. I think that's a bit of an illusion of our ego and, well, I did this and I earned that. But the truth is, I think we're very codependent. But especially in hockey, so much of it comes down to parents investing so much time, money, and energy into nurturing that for their kid to get to that level.
Yeah, I think you're a great point on the morning practices, because even when I was growing up, I kind of gravitated towards ball hockey because my dad worked at 5 a.m. Like, there's no
Yeah,
way
like
he's taking me to practice in the morning.
I'm a parent now, and if my kids, I'm like, yeah, watch hockey on TV. Like I get why my parents did. Yeah, watch it on TV. That's fine. I'm not driving to Chicoutimi. I'm not. We can't do all that. I get it. I get it now.
So take me back when
But
you were a kid.
more respect to the parents that do it. All the respect in the world.
For sure. And there's, different priorities, as you mentioned, where, if you're a recent immigrant to the country, getting food on the table is the priority rather than,
Right,
and
right.
maybe, sports at that point. So totally understood. All right, take me back to young Sammy, kid. When he's watching the Habs, who's his favorite player?
So at a real young age, of course, Patrick Roy was reached sainthood practically in the city of Montreal. But my first favorite player that I could really remember, I liked Mats Naslund a lot. So this is probably the 88, 89 team. Those are my earliest memories, but I loved Russ Courtnall. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh yeah, he lives in Victoria, British Columbia, not far
Get
from here.
out of here, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
he's
all
still around.
right. Yeah. He was my favorite player as a kid. I don't know what it was, his speed or something. Like I loved the way he played. And not that I really had a grasp of the intricacies of the game of hockey at that age, but he was just one that jumped off the page to me for whatever reason. Mats Naslund was a star, star goal scorer and all that stuff. And obviously Patrick Roy was a star goaltender, but Russ Courtnall was a great player who had a great career, but he was never like an NHL. He wasn't like Paul Coffey or whoever. You know what I mean? But I loved him. He was a great player, and he was my first favorite. And then I remember, and this is sacrilege to some fans, but as I grew older, I was actually a big Nordiques fan.
Okay.
Quebec Nordiques fan. I loved Matt Sundin. He was my favorite player. And then, of course, he went to Toronto, the betrayal. And then around that age, so now we're talking like 95, 96. Quebec leaves, they go to Colorado, and wrestling kind of takes over my life. So they were kind of on equal planes till about age 10. And then maybe age 11, 12, like hockey just, I stopped watching hockey for a decade, and wrestling just takes over, consumes me. And then I become a wrestler. And only then can I kind of get back into hockey, probably around age 20. So there's a solid decade I just didn't watch.
Yeah, you had the blinders on. You're focusing on the
Exactly.
passion and the hard work of
Yeah.
wrestling. So
Yeah.
I
It just
saw
became
you
an
wearing.
obsession.
Yeah, I saw you wearing the Nick Suzuki jersey when you went to the Bell Center in the lead up to the Elimination Chamber game. By the way, respect on the skills competition. You hit one target, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Yeah.
Nicely done. Who's that player on the roster right now, which you look at and say, hey, that's my guy?
Well, so it's funny because, when you watch hockey your whole life and then you get older, it's weird to realize like they're kids.
It's
You know what I
true.
mean? They're I mean literal children, 18, 19 years old. And like we drafted this Ivan Demidov last year, and I was like, we got him, yes. And I'm like, I'm getting all excited for a literal teenager. You know what I mean? Like he could be my son now. It's just crazy. Um, so I kind of manage my like I don't know. I don't view them quite in the same way because I used to look up to them, and now I'm older than them. So it's like I don't know. I look at them differently now. But for sure, I love so many pieces of the team that we have right now. Obviously, Cole Caulfield, Slavkovsky, Suzuki. Those three are incredible. But we have a lot to be excited about, even with like the defensive core and Demidov. I think is a really big deal. I was of the camp that got really upset when we didn't draft Mitchkov. And of course you're always like, let's just wait and see how it plays out. But Mitchkov's already over here playing for Philadelphia, and it looks great for a rookie. So whatever, I'll let that one slide. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say any one piece. I'm just really excited about the prospect pool. Like watching Lane Hutson. I actually, because I follow scouts and stuff. I got more obsessed with hockey a little bit because I also play fantasy hockey now.
Okay, so
So
you're
like,
all in, yeah.
yeah, it's not just the Habs. I'm very aware of who's doing what all over the league. So I was actually that year when we drafted Lane Hutson. I was like, man, I hope we get this guy, and we drafted him, and I was so excited. And now everybody's kind of seeing, that he has potentially even Calder Cup, Calder Trophy prospects. You never know. Like he's looking great. There's just so much to be excited about. And I think when Demidov comes around, maybe in a year or two, whatever it is, I think there's just so many great pieces, and it's just a matter of trying to be patient and wait for them all to come together. But so are you a Canucks guy? Obviously, you're
So I grew up in
Vancouver.
Vancouver. I got the little
Right.
nameplate here behind me as well.
I mean,
But
that's a
of
good
course,
looking team, right?
hey, they're looking good. But I cover them on a daily basis as well. In addition, working Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi. So we're not supposed to have teams on the show once you get into it. And but I grew up in
Right.
Vancouver, so there's
Fair
always
play.
an extra affinity, right?
Well, even if you take the bias out of it, I think they are looking very good, and they have a good team on the ice. But there's always a rough few years before you get there.
Yeah, and
But
hey,
that's a
look
good
at
thing.
Winnipeg right now. You never know in the NHL. They went
Yeah,
from being
yeah.
a team that didn't get done in the playoffs to being the best team in the NHL.
Well, yeah. You look at the Leafs and you look at that core four and all the star power in the world, but they're struggling to get out of the first round. Not to pile on here. I
Yeah,
know they get criticized enough, I'm sure, but Um, you just like you said, you can't tell. You
No,
never.
you can't. And I do want to have a one very quick game with you here. I'm going to give you a wrestler's name,
All right.
and you let me know um, who I guess the equivalent hockey
The
player would
hockey
be.
equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So let's start off with you know this person very well, Roman Reigns.
Oh man. I guess you'd have to put him in like Connor McDavid type territory, Maybe Sidney Crosby actually. I put him in Sidney Crosby territory because he's a bit more like McDavid's easily the best player in the league, I think. I think it's actually crazy that he's not postered, like his face isn't plastered everywhere, you know. But Sidney Crosby, I think, was that guy and was very much like the face of the company and got the endorsements and all that sort of thing. So I think I'd put Roman Reigns in like Crosby territory.
All right, love it. I agree with that one. Kevin Owens, another guy you know well.
Yeah, he's a tricky one. Who could you equate him to? Because he's a star, but he's also Smash Mouth. You'd be
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I mean, this is going back a little bit, but almost like Eric Lindros, like a superstar power forward. You know what I mean?
Yep, yep.
That,
That's a great pull though as well. Hall of Fame
yeah,
week. We know Lindros went in a couple of years ago, and like big name, big star, but also in your face.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
that
yeah.
physical element.
Maybe like, yeah, I'd put him closer to Lindros. I was gonna say maybe like a Kachuk, like a Matthew or Brady Kachuk, but he's closer to Eric Lindros than either of those guys because those guys are great trash talkers too, and Kevin's a great trash talker. But I think Lindros was more physically imposing and more physically dominant than those two guys. Not to take anything away from them, they're great.
All right, here's the toughest one. Sami Zayn.
I don't know. Um, God, but one of the names that came to mind is Joe Thornton. So
Yeah.
this guy obviously like a great, but never necessarily won the cup. Great playmaker as well, like in the style he played, and obviously a hard worker, a smart player, but no doubt, like he's a Hall of Famer and all that kind of thing. That's not even a question. Maybe I don't know.
All right. No, I
Another guy
love it.
came to mind. I
He's
don't know.
one of the best of his generation as well. I think that's a great one. Just like you.
That's it. And like, if you actually stop and look at his body of work and his career, you're like, man, that's impressive. But he's not the first person you think of as like, Hart Trophy winner and Stanley Cup winner. But if you stop and actually look at his resume, he did great. And he even led a team to the finals, if I'm not mistaken. The Sharks made it to the
That's right.
finals, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe him.
Okay. Before I let you go, you've been really
I'm
generous.
actually worried I'm like talking myself up too much comparing him to him.
No, no. Hey, as
Yeah.
somebody who's been watching wrestling for all these years, you've been at the highest level, just like Joe Thornton, and it's an honor to talk to you. Before I do let you go, though, because you've been very generous with your time, wanted to hit you on November 30th in Vancouver. Of course, Survivor Series WarGames coming up. I'm in this market. People are excited. People are ready to
Great.
go. I've had staff asking on our show to take the weekend off, so you're going to have a lot of people in the arena. First of all, OG Bloodline versus the Bloodline. What kind of rival is this? Leafs Habs kind of esque right now? Are we getting to a heated rivalry here?
Well, maybe it is more for some of those guys because, as certain members have been quick to point out, I'm not family, right? So I didn't grow up with some of those guys, but but maybe for that, I mean, for them, I can only imagine, growing up as like 6-year-old kids, 8-year-old kids, 10-year-old kids, and this thing being around your life, your entire existence, and your father's doing it and your uncle's doing it, to now you guys are all in it together, main eventing. I would think it's very, very special for those guys. Not to say it's not special for me, because again, we talked about how the Bloodline story has been, so special and how grateful I am to have been a part of it. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the biggest rivalry going on right now. So I would compare it maybe less to a perennial kind of rivalry like the Habs and Leafs, and more of a, just whoever's in the Cup Finals that year. If it's like New York, LA, they might not be year-long rivals, but that's a big rivalry. Come the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah, it's maybe even last year's Florida versus Edmonton. You got some of the best in the game in one playoff series, ready to go head to toe to toe, right? So I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a big one, though. Let me tell you, it's a big one, and the fact that it's in Vancouver is it's a big deal, and I'm really excited about it. I really genuinely am.
Well, I know that this market is really excited in the country as well. If you can't be there in person, you know where to hit it up on pay-per-view. Sammy, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
Continued success, and you're also an inspiration. Knowing, obviously, the Muslim community watches Hockey Night in Canada, Punjabi. There's a lot of Urdu speakers, and I know you're an inspiration to a generation of many across the world as well, and especially from the Muslim community. So keep up the great work, my friend.
Yeah, that means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that was my conversation with Sami Zayn. Hit him up on the 30th if you're in Vancouver. If not, you know where to watch pay-per-view. And thanks again. We'll catch you next time.